Okay, now we get to the section. We're actually following the thing now. Effective assessment. National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment in 2012 did a wonderful study. They took a look at 9 institutions around the United States that were award recipients from CHIA and the National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment Advisory Board. They selected award recipients from around the country. These were 2-year institutions, 4-year institutions, research-intensive institutions, and ones that are looking at, standard community college education. So they got a nice panorama. The 9 was the initial set, and they had a much larger pool behind it. And what they did is they did a deep analysis of these institutions that are all considered to be highly effective in the area of assessment. And they said, what are the things that these institutions are doing to help this, and what are the things that are common across all of them? Let's boil it down to just those few common things that seem to be working regardless of format, regardless of institutional type. It's an interesting question. And they came up with the following items. They began with, first and foremost, it's no longer sufficient for institutions to simply have assessment plans. You actually need to be doing it. This is not simply driven by the commitment of these institutions. This is now becoming an external demand. We used to be able to blow them off and like, oh yeah, it's 2002, we got plans. Plans are no longer in place. These institutions have moved beyond plans and are really embracing the actual practice of this. 2. This is a problem being faced even at the places that are doing the best job. Most assessment data are still used for accreditation. More and more are being used for improvement. Problem. However, we've moved away from the initial challenge of getting institutions to simply do assessment, and at these leading edge institutions, the problem that they're facing now is the closing the loop problem, the actual analysis of data and making decisions based on it. That next step before you rinse and repeat and turn into the guinea pig. That's the big challenge faced there. That's from Blasian Wise. They did that work the year before. And they were looking at the Wabash Project, which is a big study that actually was a failure, which is cool. Some promising practices. The big piece in all of this is what they call institutional framing of assessment. This is where we move away from this talk of culture of evidence or culture of assessment, and we start talking about practical ways in which universities and colleges are putting their money and their, we'll say money, I won't swear, their money where their mouth is. So for example, and I wrote this down when we were talking earlier, when we were watching the videos, it is almost universal at these institutions that they have separated faculty evaluations from the student learning process. Those are different things. A faculty member will not be evaluated based on her student learning outcomes. The teaching part of her portfolio for her annual review and for her promotion and tenure is handled differently. She may use those data in it, but the institution's interest is not in that. We have the processes. Unless we don't trust our current processes for promotion and tenure, which would call into question a whole lot of things, they want the student learning outcome assessment to be separate from that because that's in the interest of furthering learning. Are there instances in which they can cross? Well, a faculty member who's struggling with a lot of all of this stuff, you're going to find out in plenty of other ways. That gets this fear from faculty out of the way that we heard in these videos of, you're going to use this to punish us. And they said, no. We've got that. You do annual evaluations with your chair. We do course evaluations. We do these other things. We've got that in place. Those mechanisms are there. Student learning outcome assessment is an institutional priority. And they built strong walls between those. That doesn't sit well with everyone, but we are seeing it. They are trying to embed assessment into the institutional processes, such as program review, into governance structures, into their communication strategies, into strategic planning, into resource allocation, not to punish an individual person, but to look at what's in the best interest of the school, college, or institution as a whole. They're making assessment a meaningful and regular part of institutional culture by doing things like setting aside professional development resources, real resources, for people to get trained in assessment in their field, to send them to conferences in their field to talk about assessment, not simply to talk about it in vague generalities. They allow formal time for academic units to do reviews of student learning assessment data. They find actual venues and free up time for people to do that. So for example, at Rochester, we have some academic units that they've set aside one Friday afternoon a month where they're looking at the latest data. They are fed, they are given all kinds of perks there, and that time is set aside from their research schedule, from their teaching schedule. It was built in. And resources were put in to help them facilitate that. People who are taking leadership roles got free iPods or something like that. But they have professional development funds that they allocate out to their units. The institutions that are doing this make a commitment with resources and time and energy to support it. And that's tough because we're in a resource-restricted environment. And awards programs. Show off the best practices that are occurring at your institution. Showcase them on the university's website or the college's website. Talk about it. We talk about research that way, and it's wonderful. We get all kinds of gassed up about that, and that's good. We should be showcasing it. But we can also get some value on showcasing this internally to our audiences around campus and externally to external stakeholders about really good practices that are happening in this field and in this arena. All of these institutions have faculty or departmental ownership of the assessment process. They let the assessment practices reflect the discipline. That's been a theme that I've gone to again and again and again, because everywhere I go, I continue to see people trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. And we get bored with that and we walk away. Our work doesn't look like that. They share information widely on assessment. They don't hide their light under a bushel. Assessment data are shared widely to internal audiences and to external audiences. What types of external audiences? Potential students, parents of potential students, state agencies. Our research data from this academic major demonstrate boom, 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 boom. If that student's going to 5 different institutions and parents are with them and they're able to walk in and see charts and graphs of real learning gains and student reflections on that and videos of that, do you think mom and dad are going to go, this is interesting? Do you think a student's going to say, wow, you've added flesh to the bone of what this major looks like that I'm coming to? I can really see the stuff they're doing. It has an added value. They make it front and center. They build assessment programs around very small, manageable pieces. My old provost called this playing Vivaldi. Vivaldi, the joke is that he came up with one thing and just played it again and again in different ways. They call it playing Vivaldi. Find some set of practices that are working and try to replicate those where they can be replicated. And find other areas where they're building their own thing and see if you can share that. It doesn't always have to be shared internally. Contact other departments around the country. Steal their ideas. Play Vivaldi. Next steps for these groups. When they said, well, what are you looking at over the next 3 years when it comes to assessment? They said, we want to engage more stakeholders. They want to move off campus. They want to start talking to more employers. They want to start talking to more people who are alumni. They want to start talking to more people who are doing field experiences with their students. They want those groups engaged in the assessment process as well. They want to build a more robust process for assessment of assessment. Yeah, I know. That's where one of those kooky graphs would come in. But if this is a process, and if you are constantly tweaking it, they want to know, what are we doing to make sure that the process itself is unfolding? Is it too much information? Is the calendar too restricted? How do we change that? We ask those questions whenever we're looking at institutional processes. And continuing to become more transparent. There is a tendency, particularly if the results are not always promising to want to hide them and only showcase the areas where our brilliant kids are. Don't look at those philosophy majors. Don't look at linguistics. See how good they are, or whatever the case may be. Being transparent about how performance looks can help you actually address the problems, as opposed to creating an assessment system that turns into an echo chamber and simply gives you the feedback that you want. Now, this is where panic ensues. But wait a second, okay, so that's great for all of these super awesome institutions that are young and beautiful and famous and fabulous and all of the other things. We're just trying to get started. Fear thee not. The rest of our time talking, we're going to look at just that. You need to learn to crawl before you can run, and I'm aware of that. I just wanted to show you that these institutions that are even considered to be the best of the best are still struggling with a lot of these questions. They're struggling with how to take the process and make it useful, how to take the stuff that they're collecting and make those tweaks, and how to engage the broadest possible community in their work. Not terribly different than the challenges you face at the very beginning of this process. Trying to get stakeholder involvement, trying to get a process in place that makes sense, and trying to get people to buy in so that they give you the information that you need. I'm going to give you practical steps, and we're only going to look at two things. I'm going to talk to you a bit about student learning outcomes, and then we're going to talk a little bit about processes. I'm going to send you home with something in your hands as well as your head. People always go to these professional development workshops and they do it just wasn't practical enough. That's like the last bastion of a scoundrel, by the way. It just wasn't practical enough. Short of me coming to your office and actually doing it, wouldn't be practical enough. This is the practical piece. Outcomes and processes. Things you can actually go and do. I'm going to keep hitting these themes. Always start small. Don't get all in a froth when you leave here today and be like, I'm assessing everything. Maintain very modest goals with what you want to do, whether it's assessing your students in your course or talking with your colleagues about assessing your program. Keep it manageable. Assess and use things that you already have in place. Don't try to build a whole new set of structures. Always reflect your own disciplinary culture and practice. And remind yourself again and again, this is a process. This is a process. This is a process.